Hey, everybody, welcome back to Great Mondays Radio. I am so excited today to talk about creating cultures of creativity with my good friend and very talented designer, Garrett Warren. He is the director of design at Tubi, the streaming service, Tubi.tv, for those of you who are interested in checking it out. Garrett, hi, good to see you. Thanks for coming on Great Mondays.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. That was a very wonderful welcome. I I don't think I could have ever sold myself that well through that.
That's my job.
Yeah.
That is my job, is to be able to sell my guests to the
Yeah.
utmost capacity, right? Like show them in their real light. So you do some really interesting work, creative work, and I guess I want to just hear quickly, like, what is it that you do? How did you get there? Let's just level set
Yeah,
on kind of like a little quick behind the scenes.
sure. Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank you for having me on the program. I love the show, and I've listened to many episodes now. I think the stuff that we get to talk about today is stuff that I'm passionate about. As far as myself, I have worked in a creative field for my entire career, mostly involved with marketing, but I helped to build my career on helping to build marketing campaigns for movies and television. I'm a big fan of that, pop culture as well. So getting to do that has always been a dream of mine. And I started out very early on as a designer. I was just a graphic designer, learned how to cut my teeth doing production work and worked amongst many different types of people and many different agencies, different types of leadership. And I think particularly with creative teams, you can get some really interesting cultures and dynamics between the people that you work with.
Right.
And from there, I grew into more of a leadership role. And currently today, I work at Tubi TV, which is a streaming service. So I'm the director of design on the marketing team there. So I work with the creative team and I liaise with other creative agencies to help get the best possible creative campaigns for the company and working through those creative assets and production work. And I help to oversee all of that.
So you have a lot of years working on teams trying to be creative or being creative. So I guess the place I want to start is, what for you, when did you first see or realize or start thinking about culture as a creative device, or something that you're like, crap, I have to deal with this, or oh my God, I get to deal with this? Like, is there a moment in your career where you're like, yeah, this is when I figured that out?
Yes. That's a fantastic question. So I don't know how many listeners out there understand the world of marketing or advertising, but it definitely has its own unique culture in that particular industry. And early on, I worked at an agency that, like many, you have to hustle. You have to really learn how to be efficient and work quickly. And the difficulty in that is sometimes being creative doesn't always add up to your deadline. It's sort of like sometimes you have to be creative under gunpoint, is how we've phrased it in the past, is like, give us $1 million idea that nobody's ever done before and do it at a low cost by
9 a.m. in the morning.
By 9 a.m. in the morning. So in terms of culture, there is this sort of underlying tone where you constantly have to hustle in advertising. And working in creative agencies. And I learned that early on. And for me, I am absolutely down to work hard. I think a lot of people out there love working hard, but when they start to lose the value in what it is that they're doing and it starts to become a burden, or you start to feel pressure from leadership above, that's when you start to either lose something like quality, you may lose people, you may lose motivation. And those are things that you have to constantly keep an eye on. So in my profession, I've seen how people can do that really, really well and keep teams together and motivated and feeling like the ship is moving forward. And I've been in situations where you just feel defeated and resentful and upset and not fulfilled. And because I've seen the way that it works and the way that it doesn't work, I've crafted the way that I help to run my teams based on those experiences. And I really try and look for individuals that are, yes, hardworking and are motivated, but also understand that, we are all sort of in this together, and we all have things come up, and we can work together to have more of like a harmonious kind of relationship.
So how do you get through the stressful deadlines then? Let's put those first two pieces together, because I know I've been in agencies and advertising's even worse than design in that capacity. So I'm sure you've had some hard deadlines as you articulated and continue to. Okay, $1 million idea at gunpoint. How do you keep culture together at that point? Because people are like thinking so hard, they're like sweating blood. It's like, I'm just gonna stare at this blank sheet. You're like, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep people together and on track when it's like 3 a.m. and it's like third night in a row or whatever the stress is?
Yeah.
How do you do it?
The term that I've heard thrown around and that I have thrown around myself is always, you have to keep an honest perspective on the bigger picture. So we're not curing cancer. We can do the best we can with the time that we got and the tools at our disposal. And as long as you kind of keep that in your back pocket and you just constantly remember, like, I'm doing the best I can under these circumstances, you tend to get, forgiveness for yourself and from your fans or from your fellow team employees, that it's going to be okay. Like, we're going to get through this. It's going to be fine. And, we're going to do what we can. And I think that, those are the times where you actually can build the best relationships with people, because you all feel like you're in the trenches, you're going through something, and you're like, I know this is a tough obstacle that we have to overcome, but we're going to do it together. I think, especially from a leadership perspective, you have to be able to recognize those moments and not be the one to say, you guys figure it out, I'm heading home or I'm leaving.
Yeah.
If you understand, you know what, my team is here, even if I don't have an active role at this moment, you guys are building a presentation or a deck that's all been done, your role is out. Just the perception of you saying, you know what, I'm staying here with you guys. I don't want you to suffer alone or feel like you're suffering alone. We're all in this together. It goes a long way,
I have made that exact mistake as a team leader early in my career. And that completely deflates it. It's like, all right, good. You guys are awesome. You're doing great. Just keep going. Right. Yeah. It's like, that's not just your job. Right. So, okay. How do you do that? How do you establish your presence now that we're all distributed? You're working, I think your team is 100% distributed, right?
Correct. Yeah. We have people.
Right. So we're doing late nights. What do you do? You're like sending gifts over Slack. I'm still here, guys. Like, what do you? Yeah.
So I try and establish boundaries for my team early on. Every team that I've been able to run and I lead, I understand that everybody kind of has different incentives for why they're there. If you're the owner of a company or you're high up in the leadership, you have different incentives than your employees do in many ways. if you're the owner of a company, you want your company to succeed. You kind of blur the lines of when you're working and when you're off work, because you are always kind of on.
Yeah. As the owner, you're always on.
Yeah. But when you hire an employee that may be a hard worker, maybe very motivated and willing to do quite a bit, their incentives can be different than yours. You know, your back is holding the weight of the company. They may not have that same stress as you are. So I think as a good leader, you have to constantly kind of remember that not everybody on your team is willing to hold the weight of the whole company on your back.
Nor should they.
And nor should they. Yeah. So how we deal with that is we say, look, we will hustle our butts off between 9 and 6 or whatever our established, our hours are. But beyond that, if we can wait or we can communicate and say, like, does this really need to be done tonight? Let's just ask that question. And you set those boundaries. And I think when you do that for your teams, they, as a leader, they start to look to you and say, like, oh, this person has my back. I want to then have theirs. And I think that's very important to know that you're willing to go to bat for your team, and in return, they'll go to bat for you, and they'll be able to work hard. Obviously, that can't happen every single time. If you have a deadline that's dire, you got to get that stuff done, but you do your best to plan ahead for those moments.
Yeah. All right. So tell me about the distributed piece of it.
Yeah. So I have a fairly small team. There's about 6 of us total, video editors, motion graphics artists, designers, and we all have kind of a mix of everything together. But everybody's spread out throughout the United States. So we have to try and establish rules for times for everyone. So
so what's the crossover?
It's a lot of crossover. I have people in New York, and I understand that they're on their time. I don't expect them to stay up till 9 p.m. their time to have a 5:30 meeting that ends at 6 o'clock my time. You have to kind of work together in those ways. And I've had experiences where I've tried to plan sort of fun activities to thinking that, oh yeah, this is going to be a great way for everybody to bond and build time together. Like, let's have a digital virtual happy hour on a Wednesday at 5:30 or something like that. And thinking like, oh, this is a great time for everybody to bond. We're just going to share stories, and it's going to be great. We'll grab a beer, just chat virtually. But sometimes that's actually had kind of negative results, because you spend time on Zooms all day and you're in meetings and you're doing this, that it can kind of have an opposite effect. So just being mindful of being able to connect with your team in a personal way, ask them questions about their life, remember personal things that they're doing or they're working on, and sharing those things throughout little moments in the day, but also just being mindful that don't force everybody getting together to like hang out virtually when it could backfire on you.
I do think the forcing we're learning by doing and screwing up. But I was just on the phone with a colleague, and as a head of HR of a 200-person startup or tech company, he's like, we're trying to get everybody back in the office for just a week at a time, and people are kicking and screaming. They're like, I don't want to go back. And so to me, it's like how can we force them to do it? And I don't think forcing is the right way to go about it. That's just it's we have to kind of re-establish what we want. I mean, you have to commit as an organization as well. You have to decide. I liked what you're saying. So you've said a few times, or a couple things that are, we're going to establish this is how we're working. Mm-hmm. I've seen it called team level agreements. Mm-hmm. Is that, do you sort of capture it that way, or is it just sort of like at the beginning of project, we're going to do it this way. Or when a new person comes on, you're like, hey, 9 to 6, this is what I expect. How do you establish those with existing or new? Like, is it project based? Like, what's your process there?
Yeah, I make it very clear from the get-go, because I've been in companies a lot where you sort of, it's very unclear, and you come in and you're like, it's a new job, I'm trying to kind of feel it out. I see some people are online till 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. I don't know if I'm expected to also work as hard as all these other people, or at least that's the perception that I have.
Yep.
I try and make that clear from day one, to say like, hey guys, here's what I do. I have an important time with my family at 6 o'clock. I take that time off. That's my time. I don't respond to emails. I don't even come into my office when we're working remotely. I expect you guys to take those moments to do the same. Doesn't have to be at 6, but just have open communication. Again, we hustle our butts off between our 8 hours that we've established. Anything beyond that, in my opinion, is an exception. And we look at those as exceptions. We're willing to do it, but we want to set those boundaries early on. It should never be the expectation. It should be an exception, you know?
Yeah. I think that's just really important. Like whatever it is, like clarify for people. And I would even argue, although this isn't always realistic, it's like clarify even before they join the company. You're like, here's what's to expect. I mean, there's company-wide, it's like expectations, and then but otherwise, we as humans are going to be looking for what is expected of me, because I want to do those things, right? I want to succeed. And that's what I think about when I think about creating tools for culture. It's like tools that establish, that are vessels for setting expectations about what success looks like. And how is that different? How is it different how is establishing the culture of a team? Maybe it's not. Is it different than for just like a normal, like a non-creative team? I don't know. Like your business is creativity. Something's got to be different.
I think most of the things that I'm talking about could absolutely be applied to any business. I mean, we're talking about sort of just, I think when I define culture to me is not ping pong tables, arcade game, popcorn, beer tap at the end of the day and in a physical place. Those are just objects that are added around you. Culture to me is the relationship between your employees that comes from the top down. And I think establishing that early on, regardless of whether it's a creative team or any industry that you're in, that's what's going to, get people to be motivated to do whatever it is they're doing to help the bigger team, and feeling like you're part of a group. The creativity thing, I think, can be interesting again, because, sometimes you're not creative in the morning. Sometimes you're not creative in the evening. You got to come up with some big idea or some design and be influenced by this, but you got to do it in a short amount of time. So I think a lot of that comes with experience and training, and always keeping that door open and feeling like if your team isn't feeling inspired or just is having a tough time with a task, just knowing like creativity is a very ambiguous kind of thing for different people. You have to be able to have an open door to say like, here's how maybe you would do it, or a more experienced designer would approach a problem, and just train them to kind of think in a way that allows them to be efficient,
What are there any pro tips, tricks, hacks when your team is not being as creative? And maybe I'll ask an even more applicable question, which is, let's say you don't have a team of creative professionals, right? So you kind of know who's showing up to your team. But for folks that are listening, creativity, it can be a very powerful tool to be able to come up with, invent new ways of doing things. Are there any suggestions that you have to help a team become more creative?
Yeah.
Become more creative together somehow?
Yeah. So we obviously work with, I mentioned like our creative team, video editors, designers, and essentially digital artists. But we work with a lot of project managers. We work with HR. We work with, products designers and engineers and a bunch of different roles within the company that don't necessarily ladder up to a creative individual. But the thing that I've learned in the past is that good ideas can come from anywhere. And if you create essentially a culture or a tone that welcomes anyone to the table to say like, hey, I have an idea, but I'm so scared to share it. That should not be the vibe. Like you should say, hey, if you have an idea, say it out loud. This is a safe space. You are welcome here. All are welcome in this spot to share their
all
thinking.
Ideas are welcome here.
Yeah. If it's not the big idea, that's fine, but maybe that idea sparks something else. And it's creating this environment where people feel safe and welcome and comfortable it may not even be a creative endeavor. It could just be a way of solving a different problem, an organizational problem,
exactly.
Time management problem.
Yep.
But when you create this environment where anybody feels like they can come to the table with something, I believe you progress faster that way. Rather than, because I've worked in places where you have someone who is like, does anybody care about this? Or they put down other people's ideas, and it creates this environment where you're like, well, I don't want to share my idea if I'm worried somebody's going to judge me for it.
Of course, that's like the big fear. That's why people don't do it, is because
exactly
they look like an idiot.
Yeah. So I think, even outside of a creative culture, just leaving that door open where anyone can come to the table with an idea, regardless of your industry, is a best practice.
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. So that's a good way to kind of start to get some of those ideas on the table. So let's talk tactically then. When you have a distributed team, have you found, I mean, it's difficult to get everybody on a Zoom call and have the same kind of interaction, right? Because like Zoom only allows one person to be talking at any one time, just as a small example of how completely inefficient that is, right?
Yeah.
Do you, like, when you have, I don't know, we're workshopping an idea or brainstorming, I don't know what your process is, right? When you bring multiple people together online to be able to solve or invent or create, how do you do it, and what's worked?
Yeah, that has been a challenge. In many ways, that is something that I think has benefited us from the pandemic. Is there was just a flood of tools to help people work better when they're not in the same room together. I tend to be a very extroverted person. I like being around other people in the same room because you can read facial expressions. You can see excitement in people's faces. You can, feel people's passions rather than through a camera and Zoom. But there are ways that you can kind of like, I'll never be one to say that Zoom will ever replace being in the same room as a certain person. But you have to do the best you can in certain circumstances. So video call tools is a big part of how we communicate. We will try and hop on. We use things like Slack quite a bit just to be able to share information quickly. If you need a file, here's a file, here's where you can get that file. Hey, did you check in on this? But even Slack can be a bit difficult just because if you have a big company and so many people are talking to you, half your time you're spending on Slack trying to respond to people.
Exactly. Yeah.
We use tools like Figma, where everyone can jump into this one thing. You can post an inspiration, you can comment on it, say, oh, this is really great, I like this, what about this? And so it is another tool for allowing people to all collaborate in one place, and you can kind of see what everybody's doing. You can set up things for voting if you have 8 or 10 different options for a look. How do people, you know, which one is the favorites that are coming to the top? So, you know, we constantly try and test new tools as well. Google Workspace has been a big one for us, just being able to comment and share links and things.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, we've adopted Miro as a collaborative platform. It's a little less designery and more accessible. And I actually did. I have templates on Miro for my culture modules, my exercises so I really kind of lean pretty heavily into it. It's actually a pretty cool program. So yeah, I mean, my opinion is that I think the technology is not there yet. There's room for a big growth. And I think, you know, you're looking at the Zooms of the world where like, oh, you can now use Whiteboard, or, you know, it's like there's, you know, Slack has now these little like areas to, you know, post ideas. So I think that it's growing. I think there's some interesting opportunities there, but that's, I mean, to me, that's tough. And that's one of the reasons why you would want to come together, right? Is purposeful to do that kind of thing.
It's a kind of side story that has to do with this. I had started a position as a creative director of an agency literally a few days before the pandemic was officially announced. And as we've talked about before, I go to Comic-Con every year, and I love Comic-Con. I love getting to be in person with people who love the same things. It's a magical experience. But that year, Comic-Con was going to cancel. We knew it inevitably. Everything was going to be canceled. So the agency that I was at had to come up with an idea of how can we bring people together in a very unique way to share in a cultural moment, for like a trailer for a film or an interview with a director. And so we had this idea of, and a lot of, this wasn't novel. I think a lot of people at this time sort of went into this space, but we built a virtual experience platform to do more than what Zoom was doing, where you felt like you could create an avatar for yourself. You could enter a web-based 3D environment. And in this case, we actually ended up working with Paramount Pictures to create the Paramount Pictures backlot, where you could log in from anywhere in the world and be there in a space, 3D physical space with other people. And you could move your avatar up to someone else and talk to them as if you were there. So we learned a lot about how people interact and what tended to work and what didn't, and what was important to people during that time.
Do you think that kind of, I mean, I've seen a few of these. I had someone on early in one of my earlier episodes who's building a platform for co-working in that same way of like people around. Do you, through that experience, do you think you're like, that was a fun experiment, but probably not, or like this piece really worked well?
It was, I loved working on this thing. I thought it was very interesting, but I don't think it's going to change the way that people interact with each other. I think it was a novel idea for a very specific use case, but I don't think that it is the, you know, I don't think it's going to solve the solution of being in a room with someone or feeling as close to physically being in a room with someone.
That's sort of the gold standard, isn't it? Like, I think that's you're trying to kind of always approximate the in-person. I don't know, we'll see, right? Apple Vision Pro, if we're able to like be with our avatars, and that'll be better. Who the hell knows? Final thoughts, final tips, creativity, creating cultures of creativity, distributed. Is there anything you want to share that you haven't already?
I think that you know, this applies to anybody that you work with, but it's always been kind of the golden rule of life. But, you know, do unto others is how you would want to be, you know, treated yourself. I know that's not the right phrase. I butchered that horribly, but like the idea is there.
Yeah.
Whether you're a leader or whether you're an employee or a CEO of a company, if you can just always put yourself in the position of the people that you're working with and just have some empathy and have some understanding about, you know, what people are working on or going through, or the struggles they have, the challenges they have. If you always kind of remember that and put yourself in those shoes, I think you have the most success of getting a team that will want to work hard, be motivated, and have your back.
Yeah. So even just in distributed, even when you're far apart, getting to know who those people are for who they are, not just during the workday.
Yep.
Sounds like a big unlock for you.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Amazing. Garrett Warren, Director of Design at the streaming service Tubi TV. You can also check out a bunch of his amazing work at the GarrettWarrenProject.com. And also, if you have any Batman questions, you should send him a note, because he'll be able to answer that for you. He's got an entire wealth of Batman knowledge. So a little outing of you there for fun.
Yeah.
Thanks, Garrett. It was so good to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Josh. I had a lot of fun.